Howdy y'all, Joe Hills here, recording as I always do in Nashville, Tennessee, and today on the Hermitcraft server, I'm about to run 3 of my Patreon patrons through the Ravenloft Castle. This is going to be an experiment in failure. I know that I am not fully prepared to run this, but I've spent so much time thinking about it that whatever I think will go wrong won't, because I've already planned around it, but there's stuff I haven't thought about at all, and I know that's going to go wrong, but I don't know what it is. So today, I've got 3 folks here to help me. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them one by one. In the game, they will be represented by these 3 flags. With the diagonal flag that looks like part of an A, we have Ozathoth. Say hello, Ozathoth.
Hi, everyone.
And Ozathoth, what kind of character will you be playing?
I'm playing a high elf bard.
High elf bard Ozathoth. I'm just going to use your Patreon handles or Discord handles as your character names for simplicity's sake, because when we actually play with the hermits, I suspect that False Symmetry will want to play a character named False. You know, gotta reinforce that brand. So we've got Ozathoth with the diagonal flag marker. With the vertical flag marker, like the bar in the letter D, we have Dane Leon. Dane, what kind of character are you playing?
I will be playing a Hill Dwarf Paladin.
Hill Dwarf Paladin. They like to smash and hopefully save. So let's see, over here with the horizontal stripe, which should actually be a black flag I've had pointed out to me, is my patron Black Flag.
Hey guys.
Hey Black Flag, what will you be playing today?
I'll be a tiefling barb.
A tiefling barbarian. So, for those of you who don't know, if you're not really into the D&D structure, a tiefling is kind of like a person of demonic descent. So, if you visualize what your tiefling looks like, do you have any remarkable features, Black Flag?
Probably like evil horns and stuff.
Great, evil horns, just like my favorite evil ska bands. I am so pumped. Let's go ahead and get started. Now, even though we're going to be playing in the big castle later on, which I'm sure you guys have seen me build out over the course of many, many episodes, we're going to start here above my gaming shop, perspective check, at the gaming table. And we're going to, in-game, start off in a tavern. Well, after about 4.5 hours of gameplay, I think I learned quite a bit about the ways that things can go right and the ways that things can go wrong. As night falls over Castle Ravenloft, let's go ahead and review. So I want to start on a positive note. One of the first notes I have out of this is that the table works really well for introducing the game, but I need to carry extras of any sort of markers or character banners or anything I leave down there, because I will inevitably forget and leave all that there before heading to the castle. And it's too far to run back. Not going to do that. Lesson learned. 2. Using the floor behind the shop as graph paper works really well at big scales, I suspect, but I have proven that it does not work well at smaller scale. I'd let myself be hemmed in a little bit by the lack of more obsidian, which I can fix, but, you know, I have to do it. And I'm considering creating an outdoor space with a map when appropriate. Like, with a village, instead of creating it on this obsidian floor, I could make a little small-scale village outside and then make Minecraft maps of it. Now, one thing I also noticed, classic opening for the adventure, includes telling the story of how the characters arrived in the cursed land of Barovia, home of Castle Ravenloft, and they visit the village in the valley below the castle. Story-wise, it sets things up really well, establishes all the themes. It's like the overture in a play or in a musical or an opera. But the problem is, an overture usually doesn't last like an hour to an hour and a half, and unfortunately, in terms of pacing, it took us almost an hour and a half to reach Madame Ava's camp, which is the last stop before the castle, basically. Now, for the hermits playing this, their fans won't know D&D, and they're going to want to probably get into the visual environment of the castle as quickly as possible. So I'm thinking I will start the game at Madame Ava's camp and rewrite a little bit around that to accommodate that. So there's a lesson learned. Now, lesson number 4. Madame Ava, she's the fortune teller, and she gives the players clues about where helpful items and allies can be found inside the castle, as well as what room in the castle they will confront Strahd von Zarovich, the vampire, in. Now this is randomized using a special card deck I have a deck of these cards, and it's really cool for running this in real life because the cards have creepy pictures on them, and that's great. But it's not as good over voice chat. And I'm thinking that what I probably want to do is build a card dispensing randomizer in-game to work around this problem. So, boom, lesson learned. The next lesson is that the castle needs to be logically complete, because although the players could decide to go anywhere first, I really prepared for the routes I thought they would take. And in the case of our test game, our trio didn't want to leave their horses outdoors and decided to look for stables before entering the castle, which required opening a gate that I forgot to build in the first place, across a lawn I hadn't filled in yet, to arrive at a carriage house I hadn't even poured a foundation for. Now, another thing I realized I missed was that I forgot to roll random encounters on the encounter table every time players arrived in a new area, and that can cause all sorts of chaos and mayhem, and the castle is really built around that happening. So, once I did remember to start doing that, we had a really great situation where Dane, who was like a 10th level dwarf paladin, was getting chased by an animated broom as he sprinted up and down 120 feet of stairs to help his friend stuck in an elevator trap. And that's the sort of fun, goofy randomness that really can build on the game. Now, another thing we ran into was with level 10 characters. Like, I knew that we only had 3 people playing, so I wanted to give them a little bit more than I would normally. But the problem is, it turns out it's easier to manage a bigger group of lower level characters than a small group of higher level characters. Because these guys at level 10 had access to too many abilities with characters they weren't familiar with. So they weren't able to always assess what would be most helpful in a given situation. Keeping the characters at level 8 and reviewing them with the hermits one-on-one before we play will probably be a huge help. Now, another thing I'm realizing is with new players, I might have to nudge them to go out of their way to strategize more than I'm used to, because I'm talking a lot when I run a game like this. I'm describing the world to them, and new players might think that I'm trying to push them down certain paths. But really, I want them to push back, and if I don't give them the occasional breather where I say things like, it occurs to you you may want to agree on your priorities and strategy before you proceed, they might not do that. They might just go, where do we go? And it's not my job to answer that. That's their job. But I need to establish with them that it is their job to do that. So, let's see, another thing. Even though every character has a class and a species, like they might be an elf bard or a orc barbarian or something, there's a lot to keep track of in the adventure itself. And so even though barbarian and wizard are jobs, there are other sorts of jobs you can have in a game like this that move responsibility from the dungeon master to the players. Now, in his show, The Sea Team, Jerry Holkins solved this problem by giving the characters jobs like cartographer, so somebody who's in charge of maps, decisionist, person who's in charge of break and tie decisions, hordes person who keeps track of the loot, and a documancer who handles legal documents and correspondence and stuff like that. Now, with the exception of hordes person, these roles don't really work well in the Castle Ravenloft setting, but the core concept is sound enough that I think I've come up with a few of my own just to give people things to be responsible for that kept coming up. For example, no one could, everybody was trying to keep their own notes on the names of the characters that they met, but then they all disagreed with each other. Was it this or was it that? No, I have this written down. So I think having one person whose job it is to be the people person. They have to handle introductions in-game, and they keep track of names and details of everyone the party meets. Another thing we ran into is every time that there was a round of introductions, nobody wanted to introduce themselves first. It's silly. I'm sure the hermits might not have this problem the same way that some of the other players would, but having somebody whose job it is to say, hey, this is so-and-so, this is so-and-so, that'll keep the game moving in social scenarios. And ostensibly, this person's job is to keep track of everyone they meet, because their adventuring party might want to send them holiday cards or shake them down for information later. So just having one player whose job it is to keep track of that, I think, will keep the game moving faster. And another one I was looking at is the decisionist, as Holkins described it, is ideal for breaking ties with an even number of players. But I was thinking maybe when you have a larger group, having somebody whose job it is to be the settler might be better. So if the party is debating something for too long, this person just chooses an action. we had Think Deep try this in our Death House game. He was the barbarian, and whenever he would get bored because no one could decide if a door was safe or not, he would just walk through it, that sort of thing. And I was thinking the settler should also be in charge of making sure that everyone gets rest and settles down for the night, and he's in charge of the watch order, like who stays awake first, who stays awake second, who stays awake third. Because normally I would ask this as a dungeon master, and rather than asking 5 people at the table, okay, what's the watch order, I can say, settler, what's the watch order? And then they can argue with the players, and I can watch. I want to watch the players talk among themselves, not just be talking to them, because I'm not real in this setting. So, let's see. Another one. So we've got Madame Ava's clues about where special secret items can be found in the castle, where allies can be found, that sort of thing. I was thinking everybody's having a hard time keeping track of all this information. We should have one player who's called the Opportunist. They keep track of useful information about future opportunities. If there's a clue, a prophecy, a hint, boom, that's their job to keep in mind and investigate and bring to the party's attention when they might be in a situation where they need to pay attention to that sort of thing. Another thing we ran into in the Death House game was that some of the players didn't have dark vision, so they had one lantern between them because they didn't want to call too much attention to themselves with a whole bunch of lights, but they had to keep track of where the light was in the formation, and people who couldn't see in the dark had to stay near the person with the light. It might make sense to have a person, when you have non-dark vision characters, called a torchbearer, and they're in charge of who has light, when it's lit, when it's not lit. Like if they're entering a possible trap and they want to say, turn off the lights, it's their job to tell everybody to extinguish the lights. They make that call. And they're also the person that the dungeon master will ask, in what order is the party walking? Like the torchbearer is in charge of deciding who goes first, who goes second, third, fourth, that sort of thing. So, speaking of marching order, I was thinking about it, and I was trying to figure out if it made sense to have a dedicated person whose job it is to always walk at the back of the formation, a rear guard, if you will. And what I realized from a role-playing standpoint, in order to flesh that out more, what we actually needed was a specific job when people are trying to help people. Like, adventure and parties, a lot of times, when I've been playing with more idealistic people, or idealistic characters, everybody wants to help everyone. And when someone's in danger, that's great to help them, but sometimes in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, somebody might only be pretending to be in danger, or somebody might legitimately be in danger, but also be legitimately a bad person who will rob from you at the first chance they get. So I was thinking the rear guard of the party would not only be tasked with walking at the back of the formation and making sure you're not being followed, but any time that the party rescues someone and has them accompany them, the rear guard would keep that person in front of them and in their view at all times. It's their job to be suspicious of somebody that everybody else is already friendly with, basically. Like, you can't just be like, oh, hey, we rescued this wizard. This wizard's awesome. Like, the rear guard's job is to be like, yeah, he seems pretty cool, but I'm going to be skeptical, just that sort of thing. And not that everyone in the game deserves to be treated with suspicion either, but that creates interesting role-playing scenarios that I think could possibly pay off. Maybe in Ravenloft, maybe elsewhere. But anyway, wow, I have been talking a lot about this. But we have got to get this game going. We got to get this castle built, and we are going to have a lot of fun. But you know what? Before I close out this episode, you may have noticed it was mid-roll ad-free, thanks to Patreon support from Kathleen Heath. So, because of Kathleen Heath's $50 a month donation, that mid-roll ad has been substituted with a poem at the end of the episode, written by me, Joe Hills. Let the dice fall how they may, not where they may, because they will fall, and fall, and fall, past tabletop, through chair legs and their legs as a single roll, and scrambles us all. Anyway, until next time, y'all, this is Joe Hills from Nashville, Tennessee. Keep adventuring.